All right, welcome everyone. We're going to give everyone a few minutes just to filter in now that we've opened up the webinar. But thank you for joining us this evening for this virtual author visit with the Lincoln Public Library. As everyone trickles in, I'll go over a little bit of the housekeeping for any of you who don't know me. My name is Kathryn Hunt. I am the director of the Lincoln Public Library. This is part of our series of virtual author visits. We're going to be talking with Florencia Ramirez, a fantastic author and researcher, for about the next hour. During this time in your Zoom window at the bottom of the screen, you should see a section for Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A section. We'll be monitoring that and going through the questions toward the end of our event this evening. If you put them all in there as opposed to in the chat, it is easier for us to keep track of your questions and when they've been answered. We'll try and keep an eye on the chat as well. But again, that question and answer is the best place to put those questions to make sure we get to them. If anyone is not able to type, if you're connecting through a phone or something like that, we will also try and save some time at the end for anyone who needs to call in to ask the question. But again, that will depend on the number of questions that we have, if we'll be able to hold that time. Well, and with that, I think we're a couple minutes past the hour, so we will get started. So I am very excited to welcome Florencia Ramirez, who, as I mentioned, is both a researcher and an author of a fantastic and very timely book, given the reemergence of drought in our state and the relatively constant state of drought, it seems, the last few years. That book is Eat Less Water. Thank you so much for joining us, Florencia.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here.
We really appreciate you being here. And I was hoping that as we get started, if you might kind of introduce your work. You mentioned that your prologue is a really great introduction to some of the book and some of the questions that are raised. If you might be willing to read that prologue with us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would love to read the prologue. I think it does a good job of just kind of setting the tone or the stage of what comes next in this presentation, which will really be diving into talking about what is going on, what is the state of water, and the best way that you and I can partner to really make a difference of water systems around the world. So because we absolutely can make a huge difference. This is called Drop of Water. This is the prologue in the book. Drops of water saved my father's life. In the sweltering days following my father's birth, he just lay there. He did not cry. He refused me. On the fourth day, my grandmother sent his eldest sister to borrow a small table from the neighbor's chicken coop. They would need something to put my father's tiny body on for the family viewing. My grandmother knew the signs of a dying baby. She'd given birth to 11 children, only 7 survived. My father's sister came back with a table, but she refused to give up on her newborn brother. There had to be a doctor who would examine the baby for free. She ran through the heat of the Mexican summer to the town center and began knocking on doors. Someone knew a doctor, but he was busy with other patients. When he listened to her, this little girl desperate about her baby brother, the physician agreed to make a house call the next day. That night, a strong wind blew through the open window of the bedroom where my father lay. The gust startled my grandfather awake. He threw himself over my father's listless body to shield him against what my grandfather always described as an otherworldly chill. A cold hand pressed down on his head. He believed it was the hand of la muerte, death. The cold wind retreated suddenly as it arrived. My father was still alive, just barely. The doctor arrived the next morning. After a quick examination, he knew what was wrong. He prescribed gotitas de agua, drops of water on the baby's lips. Within days, my father's condition slowly improved. He suffered from dehydration. His sister, my tia Antonia, returned the table to the neighbors, back to the chicken coop where it belonged. When I told this story to friends at school, I always made sure to emphasize the part about death paying a visit only to leave empty-handed. Did you know 1 drop of water holds all the fresh water in the world? A retired park ranger asked me at my booth during an Earth Day event. How so? If we poured all the water on our planet, both salt water and fresh water, in a gallon bucket, the proportion of water available to shower, water our lawns, drink, and grow food is 1 single drop. We live on a water planet. The Earth is 2/3 water, and 97.5% of that is salt water. Of the 2.5% fresh water, 69.5% of that is frozen. Another 30.1% hides in deep aquifers. The remaining 0.4%, a drop in a bucket, sustains all the life on this planet. Now, when I tell my father's story to my own children, I emphasize the power of a single drop of water. So thanks for letting me share that story, because it really was a story that my father would tell me over and over again as a child. And it really wasn't until I started to do this work, right, first with the water conservation and then moving into the space of writing about it, that I made that connection. You know, it's these stories that are told to us that just are kind of embedded at the cellular level. We don't really realize how they form us until we realize it. So, but you had mentioned in the beginning that we're in this drought, and I really started to think about water and water conservation several droughts ago. I think this is like 5 droughts ago. Now we're in a mega drought, but it was like 5 droughts ago. And I had just given birth to my youngest daughter, Estrella. And at that time, I opened up the LA Times, and I'm looking at, you know, there was this ad that they had pulled out, the Metropolitan Water District, which serves here in the LA area, which is where I live. At the time I lived in Ojai, but it serves this whole region. And they gave all of these tips of things that you can do to save water. And we can all recite them because we know them well, because it's the same ones that are rolled out every drought, right? So one of them was take shorter showers. And I thought, you know, I don't even know how long my shower is, because their recommendation was 4 minutes, a 4-minute shower. So, you know, at the time I would consider myself to be a conservationist, like, you know, I would think about, I'd have a compost pile, and I, you know, recycled, and I had my water bottle, and, you know, to minimize plastic. But the whole, like, water is not something that I gave a lot of thought to, because, you know, you can go to the water and turn it on at any time. So their lack of understanding of the scarcity was there for me. So I go in and shower, and I take the shower, and then during that shower, I think, I know, shower timers. Like, I had this big idea that I needed to be the person to invent shower timers. But of course, they were already invented. But I went and I ended up finding this one woman in Australia who has been suffering from really severe droughts. And she had come up with these really cute shower timers, including one that was a shape of a star. And I had just given birth to my own Estrella, my own star. So, you know, it was a sign. And so I end up importing these shower timers, and I sell 80,000 of them, including to the Metropolitan Water District. And through this process, I go to birthday events like the one I wrote about in the prologue. And I would say, you know, if you and I, or if you were to shorten your shower by 4 minutes, in 1 year, you could save 2,500 gallons of water. And I was really impressed by that statistic. And I, you know, those that I would tell would be really impressed too. Well, this was until I came across this whole other concept, which is called virtual water footprint. And virtual water footprint is essentially an equation done for anything that we touch, you know, that we are wearing, that we sit on, and especially what we eat. So they can make a calculation and figure out what is the average amount of water that's taken to make anything. So that the embedded water. So I learned that here in the United States, we eat anywhere between 500 to 1,300 gallons of water every day. So here I'm talking about saving 2,500 gallons of water by shortening your shower by 4 minutes in a year. And then here we're talking, you know, that we're eating this much water, up to 1,300 gallons of water every day. So I knew I was in the wrong room of the house, that I needed to move out of the shower or out of the bathroom and into the kitchen and by extension farms. And the idea came just like with the shower timers, because that's just how my mind works. It came with the title. It's like, eat less water. And I look over at my husband, I said, I'm going to write this book. It's going to be called Eat Less Water, because I think it's important to say things out loud, like a declaration, so that you're on the hook for it. And then he's like, okay, so let's go get something to eat, you know, and I had no idea how I was going to approach it, but I had a title. And I knew that that was what I was designed to do, was to write this book.
That's fantastic. Well, and I think one of the things you mentioned early in that I think is really important to keep in mind, you mentioned that water always seems so available. So that scarcity wasn't necessarily something that came to mind. And I feel when you're talking about virtual water footprints, that's even more the case, because it is invisible water usage in some ways. It's not something that we necessarily have direct control over from a production standpoint that we do from a consumer standpoint in what we invest in. So how did you get started in terms of the research and reaching out to the farms to kind of find some of the great examples of water conscious farming that you include in your book?
Well, where I got the idea to when you read the book, I take you on this journey with me, and I write it in present tense so that it feels like it's present, it's vibrant. And I start with a particular popular food, like or food group, and then I found farms that were doing what I consider to be the best around water. So what I went with an open mind and open heart around what I would find. Like, can I, as one individual, make a difference on water systems, was my question. And it became clear right from the very first farm I went to, which was, it was actually a chicken farm in Ojai, that absolutely I could make a difference with how, not necessarily to say, oh, you can't have that glass of wine anymore, because a glass of wine takes 32 gallons of water per glass, but rather understanding how the agricultural methods that save water that I could partner with. So for example, if I'm talking about wine, if I want to save water, it's not that the glass that I have doesn't use 32 gallons of water, but I want to find foods that are using what's called green water, more green water, which is natural rain and moisture, and not using what's called blue water, which is where we have the issues of water scarcity, which is, you know, the underground water, the groundwater tables that are dropping, and water from reservoirs. That's the water that we need to really preserve and start leaning more on natural moisture. Well, so how is it that farmers can use more green water versus blue water? Comes down to how do they treat their soil. So that was the common denominator of every single farm I went to, was how does a farmer treat their soil? So whether it's a biodynamic farmer, whether it was a farmer who used crop rotation or no-till, or a dry farmer, like, and I'm telling you all of these terms because I know that knowing the vocabulary and having the language is so important if we're going to make change, because you can't ask for something that you don't have the language for. So when going back to the wine, when I go to my local grocery store, which is, Vaughn's up the street, which I think you guys have Safeway probably, but so when I go into Vaughn's, I can ask, the manager, the wine manager in there, can you show me what you have that's biodynamic? Because I understand that biodynamic farming uses so much less blue water, because that farmer is really building their soil. Their soil acts like sponges. So when there is any moisture, their soil can hold water up to 1,000 times more than soil that has been treated with any chemicals or is using a petroleum-based fertilizer. So that's where we as consumers have so much power to change what is happening on this planet, because if we can partner with these farmers who are regenerative farmers who absolutely need our support, because all of the system, the way things are written, are not in their favor. The way that the agricultural rules are they definitely foster more like the bigger farms, the corporate farms, not the small dogs, is one of the farmers that I went to put it. So but if we start partnering and finding these farmers at our farmers markets, or by looking at the labels at our grocery stores, looking for organic, looking for words like regenerative agriculture, looking for key things, going online and buying, directly from these farmers, then we can help to support what they're doing, which really is critical. They really are at ground zero of fighting for the future of this planet, really. So, and what's really hopeful for me around doing this work is I know that we can change the story. We can change, because right now the statistic is that by 2030, half the world population will not have enough water. And that's not that far away. And then if, with every 10 years, it just gets more and more dire. But we do hold the ability to rewrite the story. If we're given the knowledge, we're equipped with that understanding of what we can do, so that it's more than just that whole rollout that they give us every time we have a drought, to say, take shorter showers, turn off the tap, don't water your lawns as often, those things which are important, but that's just a drop in the bucket versus, going back to the statistic of 2,500 gallons of water you can save in a year if you shorten your shower, versus we're eating anywhere between 500 to 1,300 gallons of water every day. So if we really want to have a conversation about how do we save water on this planet, we have to talk about how we're eating and the agricultural methods that are, by extension, how we're farming.
Absolutely. And I agree. And I think it's important And I appreciated your book's emphasis on this idea of what can we do that has the biggest impact. Because I think the other thing we have to worry about is, we need to be in this for the long term, and knowing that what you're doing has impact helps make that sustainable, helps make that reasonable to make a lifestyle change going forward. You mentioned a couple different terms there to look at in terms of trying to find providers and where we buy our food and our food products from, things like regenerative agriculture, biodynamic farming. What are some other kind of terms like that for, not everyone has the time and the resources every time before going to the grocery store to do this kind of research, to really dig into how everything's grown. What are some other kind of key phrases or some key techniques that everybody could use going to the grocery store to make sure that we are investing more in these water conscious techniques?
Well, so when in the book, I write in the introduction about this whole concept of better and best. Mm-hmm. And when I first began this process, I started with thinking around better, like what's better for water. And better for water would be organic things without chemicals. So if that's where you begin and that's where you remain, that is a big start and a good start, because like I said, organic soil that's been treated with chemicals, it diminishes the capacity of that soil to retain and hold water. So then it makes everything thirstier, right? So then that farmer has to apply a lot more water, and then that farmer also has to apply a lot more fertilizer. Then that runoff, you have the runoff of that fertilizer into the stream, into the rivers that then lead to the ocean, and it's killing everything along the way, because nitrogen is good, but too much nitrogen in water is not good. So that's, now I lost my train of thought. I was like following the river into the ocean, and then the thought left with it.
So organic is better.
Yes, organic. Then then for myself, then it became kind of a layering. First off, I just want to say this is not about perfection. And this is not about every single thing you do and eat from this point forward needs to be organic or you feel guilty about it. If you and I do a little bit more than what we're doing, collectively, that's where there's power. That, it's, so, maybe it's that you just start with your meats, like the animal products that have the highest water footprint, so like a pound of beef, for example, is 1,800 gallons of water, and a dozen eggs, 276 gallons of water. Butter, I forget what it is, but I think it's something like 3,000 gallons of water per pound. So in those areas, if you just said, you know what, I'm just going to focus on buying organic, and then the next layer, if you were to get deeper, would be, okay, now I want to start looking into what are the best farming for water. And that's when you get into the biodynamic, to the crop rotation, to in what I found and I write about for meat, and specifically, is the farmer will rotate their animals from one paddock to the next, because a cow is really, when there can be this beautiful symbiotic relationship with the cow and the land, as long as it's not overgrazing or stomping all over nests or flora and fauna, right? So just getting grass-fed meat is not the answer, which is what I thought when I started this, but rather intentional grazing, or it's also called mob grazing, or rotational grazing. There's different names for it. And you can even see sometimes it's starting to pop up on labels, which is great. Like even on egg cartons, sometimes I'll see talking about the rotation system. But why that's important is that the animal can't overgraze any particular spot that the farmer will move the animal as though there's a predator. Because when out in nature, when there's predators, the animals can't stay on any patch of land long enough. There's always this movement. But since we remove the predator, we have animals who can just eat and eat and eat. Anybody with backyard chickens knows this to be true, right? They will just eat it down until it's just dirt, until there's nothing there. So that's part of just getting deeper into it. But then let me even back up before even the organic. If you were to not even do that, the best thing you could do, and anybody can do without spending any extra money, in fact, you would be saving money, is to waste less food. We throw away in the United States I've seen anywhere between 30 to 50% of our food in total. And so when we start going into our own kitchens and starting to pay attention to how much food am I throwing away, just starting to minimize that, starting to meal plan, beginning to have systems in your refrigerator, in your pantry, which doesn't sound like it's a form of activism, but it absolutely is. When I go into my pantry and I make sure that I have created a system, and I keep going in and working to make it better and better, so that we are wasting less food, that's also part of the solution. So, a family of 4 on average throws away about $1,800 of food every year. So if you're wasting less food, then you can use that money and buy and then support your regenerative, farmer at the farmer's market, or and order maybe that coffee, that shade-grown coffee from Hawaii, for example, that they're actually growing, planting trees instead of being part of deforestation. So there's so many different wonderful farmers out there who are doing incredible things. And you know what I found for myself, which was the unexpected, is how much joy I've grown in my own life as a result of doing this work. Because it's when I started to cook with purpose, right? Like when we all get tired. We're all tired at the end of the day. And I did this too, especially when my kids were little. It's like, oh my God, what am I going to make for dinner? It's like, that's the hardest thing about adulting, is that you have to make dinner, you have to feed yourself. And then when you have a family, you have to feed other people in addition. And so instead of it, when I first started this, it was a burden. And I watched my mom too. My mom, cooking dinner for her was a burden. It was like such the chore every day. And so then I kept that same energy. But when I started to do this work, and like I would, bring home eggs where I know the person who made those eggs from the farmer's market. And I talked to the woman who dry farmed those nuts, in the Central Valley. And it's like being part of the story and the people behind the food, and knowing what I was partnering with, just I could feel the incremental change in how I felt around cooking. And so, not to say I don't get tired on days still where it's like I don't want to do anything, but usually what happens is I'll feel tired, and then I'll think about, well, this is part of how I'm the change I want to see in the world, right? Through what I'm doing in the kitchen, and it's important. So it's cooking with purpose. And then it changes the energy, and I'm in the kitchen and I can feel good about, chopping up. Like today, I need this call. So I already have it planned every week, a meal planner. In fact, I'm going to have my meal, I just finishing it up, but I'm going to have a template available for free for people who are my newsletter, so that you could just start doing it too, like having a meal plan which makes it so you save time, you save money, but the best part is you're wasting less food because you know how much you should purchase, and you know what things you need to use and incorporate into your meals. So those kinds of, all of those like action steps that feel like they're small, but they add up. They really add up.
One of the things that struck me with that, as you were talking about, and in other parts of your book as well, is the way that some of these changes seem to build on each other, and how important kind of a systems focus is on what you've been talking about. Like, even just when you're talking about meal planning, it's less waste, it's less food waste, but it's also more money and more energy available to us, which then provides that to be more involved with our families, with our communities. When you're talking about even just the kind of meat and egg raising, this idea of rotating these animals through, and the fact that that is kind of a systemic thought of how to use land and what would be happening on land and property naturally. You wouldn't necessarily have animals living on it 12 months out of the year. Your discussion of biodynamics, similarly, that you have multiple kind of uses making this soil healthy. I was wondering if you talk a little bit about how all of these systems, whether it's irrigation, whether it's animal welfare, even things like worker rights and kind of environmental and public health, do you see all these things really kind of, you can't pull on one without pulling on the others?
What comes to mind when you ask that question, which is a really important question, is what this work really boils down to is that if it's good for a river, it's good for your bodies and it's good for the community. So it's a direct reflection. So if I'm purchasing something that's coming from a corporate farm, and chances are not only is the land depleted, but the people who work that land are depleted. And when I eat that food, I'm not getting the same nutrition either. So I'm also depleted. And then the converse is true. Like, if I'm buying food that's grown with these methods I talk about, the land is vibrant. I mean, if you were to get 1 tablespoon and take 1 tablespoon of soil that from one of these farms that I write about, which, the farmer has really been building that soil. And what they're building is the microbiology in the soil, the bacteria. Just like we want to do that in our guts, we want to do that in our soil. And so if you pick up 1 tablespoon, it's like fascinating. It's like you have as many microbes as there are stars in the sky. I mean, it's just phenomenal. The poetry in all of this it just always blows me away. And also sometimes just brings me to tears because it's just incredible. So it's, if you're buying food from a place that the land is that rich, the people who are working that land are also vibrant and cared for, and the growth of the well-being of the people and and that soil go hand in hand. And then as the eater, we are rewarded with flavor, with more nutrition. And I also think energy too, like good energy, because everything, I mean, we're all energy. Everything is energy. So things hold energy. So that food, when it's cultivated in these ways with love and passion and growing well-being, and you're putting it in your own body, it's felt. There is a difference. There's absolutely a difference. But yeah, it's when you're pulling on one thread, you're pulling on all of them, because it's all connected. And then it's an illusion to think that anything really is disconnected from one another. I mean, it's all one.
Absolutely. Well, and I guess that kind of leads me into another question, though I might be setting setting us up for failure with leading up that way. But, you know, you're looking at these farms, you talk about these farms in your book that are doing the best of these practices. Obviously, it means that there are many farms that are not engaging in these kinds of practices for a variety of reasons. What are some of the biggest kind of barriers you see for sections of the agricultural industry that might want to move toward more water conscious, more biodynamic, more healthful, sustainable models of raising, but they're not able to? What are some of those barriers that might make that a struggle?
Well, the rules that I had mentioned, there's rules all in every single sector that are written for the big farms. So one example, and I write about in the beef chapter, which I went to Georgia to write that chapter, just at a farm just outside of Savannah, and would be considered a medium-sized farm. And whenever you do what's called a grind, you have to have an E. coli test, and the E. coli test, I'm going by memory, I think it's like $100 or $150 at the time for one test. Well, when this farm will do a grind, they have about 3 animals versus a huge farm which will have about 10,000 animals. Well, it doesn't matter the size. It's still $150 for that E. coli test. So it makes it hard. That's a really good example for me to understand that you can't have the same rules that apply for small scale farms and large farms, which have they're different. And so the rules need to change and shift to support the regenerative farmer, the small scale regenerative farmer, because that really, once a farm gets too big, things that I write about, like for example, the crop rotations, become harder to do. So it really is about the small scale farm, but our small scale farms are disappearing because the rules are written for our larger corporate farms. And in Hawaii, what was interesting too, that they're lush and rich and have a lot of water, but yet they have to import everything onto those islands. Like, they have no diversity of their food. And part of the issue there, or a big issue, and I write about Hawaii in the coffee chapter, is that it's much easier for the local government to lease out 20,000 acres to, say, Monsanto. I don't think they're called Bayer now, which is what they do, versus leasing it out to you, for example, who's interested in farming 2 acres. It's just, it's too much paperwork, right? So they don't want to deal with it. So there's also that's going on. So there has to be a push from all different levels for us to change those rules. But we have, as the eater, we have so much power by our choices, that if we keep asking for these things, then we're going to start seeing more and more of them, and valuing these things, these different ways of farming, and valuing small scale farmers, and then asking our legislators and policymakers to start changing the rules and offering more grants and money to support this type of farming. Because that's the other thing too, especially in California, the cost to start a farm, what ends up happening is that there is more of an interest of young people to get into farming, but then you have to lease the land, right? And if you're leasing the land, and you're building that soil and that biology in the soil, and then the landowner says, oh, guess what, I want it, you can't take that biology with you, and then you have to start over somewhere else. So, that is also the other piece of the puzzle. There's so many pieces to this puzzle, right? Is that, to have more money set aside so that people can buy land to cultivate. But there's a lot of great models out there of people doing innovative things. And so I'm always about how do we grow well-being? Because if we get stuck on what's wrong or the absence of things, that's when, at least for myself, I start to move into kind of a depressive, lethargic space of just, okay, well, forget it. I'm not going to do anything, because it just feels like, oh, there's just no way we can get ourselves out of this. But that's why in the book, I'm really about showcasing what's good. And because it does exist, there are models out there that exist. There is land that's being cultivated in ways that show us a path forward. And so it's finding those people, those places, those systems, those organizations, and helping to grow them. Let's grow what's already good in there and expand that. And let's pour our energy into that. And that actually is joyful and it's fun. And that's what's going to keep you in this. Like for myself, I'm in this for the long haul till the last day I'm here. And what keeps me going is that it's fun, that I am rewarded with the people that I meet and the way I feel and the joy that I experience.
Absolutely. I think that's really well stated and highlighted kind of that crux of difficulty between kind of the economies of scale that large scale farming has, particularly when we look at kind of monocrop, the kind of very focused farming that is very common on large scale versus the kind of the fact that smaller farms don't have those economies of scale. An equal like test costs the same no matter how much meat you're processing in a particular grind. But also the fact that some of the flexibility that these smaller scale farms have isn't necessarily available in the large scale farms. And you mentioned earlier that you were mentioning all of this language around irrigation and farming because having the language is important. And I do think that's a really powerful thing in your book and in this conversation, because having those regulations change or the conversation around changing those regulations is something that takes place in California. It takes place around where we are in Lincoln. One of our high schools, Lincoln High, has a farm site on the campus. We have UC Davis near us, which does a lot in terms of agricultural studies and management. But if we don't know those conversations or the language around it, it's hard to advocate for what we value and how we think that it should go forward. But you mentioned joy. And one of the things I did want to ask is, what's a fun or a favorite story you have from one of your farm visits that didn't make it into the book?
So one of the farmers, actually the same one in Savannah, outside of Savannah. Oh my, she was so much fun. And she had these crazy stories. And she was talking about actually her family, they were into real estate and then they bought this farm. And she's like, I have changed in ways that I never thought possible, like things that you would never think to do before, things just become normalized on a farm. So one of the crazy stories was that at the time her daughter was still in a crib, like her youngest was still in a crib. And there was this possum family that would come into the house and into her crib and with this baby. And she's like, there's no way I would have completely freaked out, but I'm just like on this farm. And so then the little possum babies would I know what it was, that the possum babies lost their mother and they adopted her baby as the mother. So she would be crawling and the little baby possums would latch on to her back. I mean, I was just listening to the story going, what? Like, can I see pictures? And she actually did show me some pictures, but yeah, I couldn't think of a way to integrate that story into the book.
So I hope this child's room was completely decorated with possums.
Yeah. Well, her immune system, I'm sure, is very strong.
Yes, I would expect so. Well, we've got a few more minutes. I do want to remind our audience that if you do have any questions, please feel free to drop those into the question and answer window. You can access that at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you're on desktop. But if you drop those in there, we'll be happy to answer them.
I wonder if you can. I know that when I tried to, like right now, I'm trying to do that in the question and answer, and I don't know where you do that.
Oh.
I don't know that there's a way, or maybe it's just mine.
Well, if that's not working for people, feel free also to use the chat then, and we'll keep an eye on the chat in particular for that. Fantastic. So yeah, please feel free to use the chat if question and answer is giving you some difficulties.
What I'll mention though is if you want to continue this conversation with me, you can easily find me on social media, but I recommend getting on my newsletter list because I'll keep you informed of the meal planning template and I'm going to be releasing or launching a podcast later this month, so you can find out about that. And it'll just be bite size, like 7-8 minute podcast, and every once in a while kind of a longer 4-course meal with interviews. But really it's going to be very action oriented. Like this is an idea of what you can do that you can implement today. So that's how I want to keep it, just short and to the point, and things that you are simple that you can integrate into your kitchen and into your shopping, and then to talk about some of these terms that we talked about. So if you would like to stay connected with me, please, I'm on Instagram and on my website, eatlesswater.com. You can sign up for the newsletter.
Fantastic. And that podcast sounds exciting.
Yes, it's called How to Eat Less Water.
Very nice.
Based on another book I'm writing. It's called How to Eat Less Water in 30 Days. So it's taking you day by day to step by step. The first part focused on how do you waste less food, and the second part on how to shop for the best foods for water, and then the third part around the eating and cooking of the food with a 30-day template there for the meal planning. So
fantastic. Is that also going to include recipes? I know one of the kind of really delightful parts about Eat Less Water, for anyone who hasn't had a chance to read it, is that there is a recipe attached to each chapter.
Yes, no, there will be some recipes, just some really simple things, and one of the things I like to do is batch cooking, so at the very beginning of the week making, so like this week I made garbanzos and fresh beans. Fresh beans is kind of a reoccurring batch cooking piece because we incorporate it in so many of our meals. But then you just incorporate that through the week, and then it doesn't feel as heavy, right? To do things. Also, another thing I like to do is have a flex night. So knowing that there's always going to be leftovers or those foods that you need to eat before they go bad, that so it gives that one day where set aside for that flex night. So just simple things like that are absolutely part of eating less water, and those are things that I'll talk about as well in the podcast.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you're keeping busy in the near future, another book coming out, the podcast. Any
Yeah.
other fun projects on the horizon? That sounds like a full plate to me, but you never know.
Yeah. Well, I am also organizing what's called, you can find this on my Instagram, the Other Strawberry Festival. And that'll be May 1st. It'll be a virtual festival. Here where I live, we have a strawberry festival that I grew up with. And it's fun. It's a fun day where they have, strawberry shortcakes and strawberry tamales and strawberry this and that. But there is no discussion, kind of going back to one of our earlier conversations around how people are treated. Because here, there's the Environmental Working Group. They're an organization that releases what's called the Dirty Dozen, and they do testing on all the produce and find which are the top 12 produce items that have the most pesticide residue even after washing them. And berries and apples are always kind of are number 1 and 2. They always kind of fight for that number 1 slot of the dirtiest. So, here in Oxnard, we grow lots of berries, and there's also lots of fumigant spraying on those berries that happen. And so this Other Strawberry Festival is a place where farm workers and their kids, their children, can talk about what that impact is on them. And then also focusing on solutions as well. So it's really powerful. It's really beautiful. This is our 2nd annual Other Strawberry Festival. So like I said, you can find that on my Instagram page, and also a poetry and art contest that is in conjunction with the Other Strawberry Festival for young people between 6 and 22. And we have prizes from Patagonia, which is one of our financial sponsors.
Fantastic. No, I think that's a really, I don't want to say exciting, because of course that's not necessarily exciting that, there are these impacts on the people who make berries and agriculture possible. But again, when we talked earlier about how everything is connected, making sure that that's not lost in the celebration of what kind of these flagship agricultural products for so many communities in our state, with Strawberries for Oxnard, that there's more to it than just the celebration of what they bring to our communities, that we need to make sure we're also taking care of our community.
Right. Because everything we eat tells a story, everything. And it's attached to a river, it's attached to a stream. It's for me, it's what story do I want my food to tell? What is the story I want my food to tell? And I want my food to tell good stories. And that's what I work towards.
Absolutely. Well, brilliant. Well, I don't see any questions currently in here. And I think that is a beautiful note to end on, that our food can tell good, beautiful stories. So thank you again, Florencia, for joining us. Again, her book is Eat Less Water. We have it in the library. You can also purchase it through any of your regular book purchasing sources. We do always recommend you jump on bookshop.org, find a local bookstore to support. Though of course, you can always get it off Amazon as well. And yes, thank you so much, Florencia.
Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful questions.
Brilliant. And have a wonderful night, everyone.